There's a Ford race car sitting in a museum in Michigan right now, worth more than $40 million. And the wildest part of that number is what almost happened to it before it became a legend. This is the story of how the biggest car company in America got humiliated by one stubborn Italian man over a handshake deal gone wrong, how that humiliation turned into a multi-million-dollar revenge mission that nearly bankrupted itself in failure not once, but twice, and how it all came down to a 5-year-old race car, a defiant young driver, and a finish so close it remains, to this day, the tightest margin of victory in the history of the most brutal race on the planet. If you think you know this story because you watched the Hollywood movie, stick around, because the real story is even crazier than the version they put on the big screen. It is 1963 in Maranello, Italy, inside the offices of the most respected racing company on earth. Henry Ford II, grandson of the man who put America on wheels, wants to buy Ferrari, the entire company, racing team included. For months, lawyers and accountants fly back and forth across the Atlantic, crawling through Ferrari's books line by line. The deal is real and close. Enzo Ferrari needs the money, and Ford wants the prestige that comes with owning the single most dominant name in motorsport. Then, right at the finish line, Enzo reads one clause buried in the paperwork stating that any increase to his racing budget would need approval from Detroit. For a man who answered to absolutely nobody when it came to his cars, that single sentence was an unforgivable insult. Enzo stood up, turned to his secretary, and said it was time to go eat. Just like that, the deal was dead. Some accounts say Enzo went further, telling Ford's team that their company built ugly little cars in an ugly factory. Whether that exact line was spoken or not, the message landing back in Dearborn was clear. Ferrari thought Ford was beneath him. Henry Ford II did not take that well. This was a man who ran one of the largest corporations on the planet, simply not built to let an insult like that slide. He walked out of that failed negotiation, flew home, and gave his racing department an order that would end up costing tens of millions of dollars and years of engineering effort. The order was 3 words long: beat Ferrari. Not just compete, but beat him specifically at the one race he cared about more than any other on Earth. The 24 Hours of Le Mans, a race Ferrari had won 6 years running. A race where Ferrari's dominance had become so total that the rest of the racing world had quietly concluded the gap to Ferrari was simply unbridgeable. You have to understand exactly what Ford was up against here. Le Mans is unlike any other race in the world. 24 straight hours, roughly 10,000 kilometers covered, run on actual closed public roads in the French countryside, minimal barriers, crowds packed in deep along the entire circuit. It isn't really a race so much as a complete test of everything at once: speed, reliability, engineering, strategy, and raw human endurance stacked together into one brutal gauntlet. And for years, without exception, the manufacturer who conquered that gauntlet was Ferrari. The 250 GTO, the 275P, the 330P, one beautiful red car after another crossing the line first, while the automotive world slowly accepted that nobody else was even close. Ford set out to close that gap, and they weren't doing it out of passion for racing. They were doing it out of pure humiliation. And humiliation, it turns out, is an incredibly powerful motivator when you happen to have one of the largest budgets in the entire automotive industry behind you. The man who got the call first was a British engineer named Roy Lunn, who ran Ford's advanced vehicle department and had previously worked on Aston Martin's Le Mans program back in 1949, meaning he actually understood endurance racing in a way most of Ford's American executives simply did not. His assignment sounds almost laughable to say out loud: design a car capable of winning Le Mans in under a year. His answer was a car that would become known as the GT40. The name came directly from the car's most defining physical characteristic. It stood exactly 40 inches tall at the roofline. This wasn't a styling choice. It was pure physics. A lower center of gravity meant less drag and less aerodynamic lift, so at full racing speed, the air trying to get underneath this car would actually push it down into the road instead of lifting it up. To pull this off, Ford brought in serious outside talent. Eric Broadley joined as chief design engineer, the man behind the Lola GT, arguably the most technically advanced British racing car of its era. John Wyer, who had personally managed Aston Martin's Le Mans winning program, came aboard to handle race management. On paper, with this much talent and money behind it, this should have been an absolute slam dunk. In reality, it was about to become one of the most expensive and humiliating failures in motorsport history, not once, but twice in a row. At Le Mans in 1964, every single Ford GT40 entered broke down. Every one of them. In 1965, the exact same story repeated. Not a single Ford finished. Ferrari won both years easily, and the Italian press had a field day with it, gleefully reporting on America's flashy, expensive, utterly humiliating failure at the one race that actually mattered. The GT40 was undeniably fast in a straight line, but it fell apart everywhere else under the relentless punishment of 24 straight hours. It was rapidly becoming the most costly mistake in motorsport history. So Ford did something genuinely smart. They handed the program to Carroll Shelby, a Texan who had gone from racing driver to chicken farmer to building some of America's most respected performance cars, and his crew of California hot rodders working out of a warehouse near the Los Angeles airport. Shelby's team stripped the GT40 down and rebuilt it as the Mark II, stuffing a thundering 7-liter V8 underneath the hood. In 1966, Ford brought 8 of these to Le Mans. Ferrari brought their best. By sunrise, every single Ferrari had dropped out. Ford swept the entire podium, first, second, and third. The win wasn't just a win. It was total, overwhelming, and the shame on the Italian side of the garage was every bit as complete as the celebration on the American side. Henry Ford II himself stood in the pit lane and watched his cars cross that line. By every conventional measure, that should have been the perfect end to this story. Ford got their revenge. Hollywood ending. Roll credits. At least, that's exactly what everyone assumed at the time. Stick around though, because what actually happened over the following 3 years is honestly the part of this story that most people, including the people who made that hit movie about it, completely skip over. And it might be the single craziest chapter in the entire saga. Ford kept right on winning. In 1967, the GT40 Mark IV took another overall victory at Le Mans, this time with an even bigger, more powerful version of the car. But in 1968, something significant happened behind the scenes. Ford's official factory racing effort quietly ended for good. Both the Mark II and Mark IV programs officially shut down. From a corporate standpoint, the company had made its point. Ferrari had been beaten, publicly and decisively, and the board in Dearborn saw no further reason to keep pouring millions into a race happening across the Atlantic in France. So a small, scrappy private team based out of England quietly picked up the torch that Ford's factory team had just dropped. John Wyer Automotive Engineering bought a pair of the older, lighter GT40 Mark I chassis and showed up at Le Mans running on a fraction of the budget Ford's factory effort had thrown around years earlier. One particular car, chassis number 1075, wearing the now legendary powder blue and orange Gulf oil livery, won the race outright with drivers Pedro Rodriguez and Lucien Bianchi. A year-old car, run by a private team with zero factory backing, had just won the single most demanding endurance race in the world. That made it 3 straight Le Mans victories for the GT40 platform. The car was no longer some scrappy underdog. It had quietly become the new king of endurance racing. And by 1969, the entire sport had essentially organized itself around one singular goal: knocking that aging Ford off its throne for good. Porsche showed up that year with something called the 917, and if you have never seen one in person, picture the meanest looking race car you can imagine. Then add even more engine. It packed a massive 4.5-liter flat 12, was wildly fast in a straight line, and Porsche built 25 of them just to satisfy the minimum production count required by the rules. This thing was built for one purpose: to crush the aging Ford GT40 at Le Mans and nothing else. Ferrari had brand new cars in development. Matra, the serious French manufacturer, had assembled a genuine factory team. Even Porsche's own smaller 908 was widely considered faster than the increasingly old Ford. Every piece was in place to finally bury the GT40 for good. The rest of the sport had essentially already written its obituary before the race even started. John Wyer Automotive Engineering, apparently, did not get that memo. Wyer's operation was a small private team based out of Slough, England, about as far removed from the glamour of Le Mans as you could get without leaving the country. They entered 2 GT40 Mark I cars that year, running on a budget that genuinely would not have covered the catering tent at Porsche's paddock. One of those 2 cars was, once again, chassis 1075, the exact same car that had won Le Mans the previous year. She still wore those unmistakable Gulf oil colors, powder blue with a tangerine orange stripe, one of the most recognizable paint schemes in motorsport history. The crew working on her called her the Old Lady because, at 5 years old in racing terms, she was practically ancient. Her 4.9-liter V8 made decent power, but nothing close to the new Porsche 917. She was lighter than the massive Porsche and proven tough over the years. Beyond that, though, the math simply did not favor her. The man Wyer's team asked to drive her, however, was not the least bit worried about that math. Jackie Ickx was 24 years old, born on New Year's Day in 1945 in Brussels, Belgium. His father had been one of Europe's most respected motorsport journalists, so young Jackie essentially grew up wandering racing paddocks the way other kids grew up on playgrounds. He started racing motorcycles as a teenager, moved into cars, and climbed through the ranks so quickly that by 1967, he was already driving Formula One for the Brabham team, finishing fourth overall in the 1968 World Championship at just 23 years old. He was fearless, genuinely fast, and had a stubborn streak that made team bosses either love him or want to strangle him. His co-driver was Jackie Oliver, a 26-year-old Englishman who had also raced Formula One for Lotus. Oliver had exactly one notable problem heading into this race. He had never once finished Le Mans before, which, looking back, was either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily reckless to bring into a brutal 24-hour endurance race. So here's exactly how the field shaped up heading into Le Mans 1969. A fleet of brand new Porsche 917s, almost certainly the fastest race cars on the planet at that moment, backed by a well-funded factory team. A pack of proven Porsche 908s, fresh new Ferrari and Matra entries, and two tired, aging, Gulf-colored Ford GT40 Mark Is, entered by a tiny private team out of Slough, driven by a 24-year-old Belgian and a 26-year-old Englishman who had never once seen the checkered flag at Le Mans. By any reasonable calculation, the odds genuinely made no sense. Absolutely nobody outside the Wire team's own garage gave them a realistic chance. Le Mans, France, June 14, 1969, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. 47 cars line up along the pit straight under a warm French summer sky. The traditional Le Mans start was, at the time, one of the great spectacles in all of motorsport. Cars parked at an angle, noses pointed toward the circuit, drivers lined up across the road, waiting for the signal to sprint to their cars and take off. And in the middle of all that chaos, 24-year-old Jackie Ickx did something nobody had ever seen before. He simply walked. While every other driver sprinted flat out, Ickx calmly walked across the track to the old lady, took his time strapping in properly, and only then pulled away, dead last out of 47 cars. It looked like an act of pure arrogance, maybe even stupidity. It was neither. It was a calculated, one-man protest. Ickx genuinely believed the running start was dangerous, that drivers sprinting across a live road and jumping in without their harnesses fastened was an accident waiting to happen, and he was right. That same year, a driver named John Wolfe sprinted to his car at that exact start, climbed in without securing his seatbelt, and was killed in a horrific crash just a handful of laps into the race. The kid who calmly walked to his car would go on to win the entire thing by roughly 390 feet after 24 full hours. The kid who sprinted never made it home. As the race wore on through the afternoon and deep into that first night, the brand new Porsche 917s, despite their massive horsepower advantage, started running into exactly the kind of problems that no amount of raw power can fix. Gearboxes started failing. Engines began overheating. The rear-end airflow, never properly sorted out in testing, turned the 917 into a white-knuckle ride once darkness fell and track temperatures dropped. Several cars spun off entirely. The 917 was insanely fast, sure, but also deeply flawed. A weapon rushed to Le Mans before its own builders had time to tame it. And that's not a typo. The brand new, factory-backed car with the massive 12-cylinder engine and endless budget was the one that simply could not make it cleanly through the night. The 5-year-old Ford, with 4 fewer cylinders, just kept turning consistent laps through the cold French darkness. With rain threatening and the night air growing colder, Ickx and Oliver steadily climbed through the field. The old lady was never going to be the outright fastest car on that circuit, but she was something arguably more important than fast. She was simply there, still running, still strong, while faster, more expensive cars sat cooling off in the pit lane with cracked gearboxes and blown head gaskets. By Sunday morning, after more than 20 straight hours of continuous racing, the field had been torn apart by attrition. The Porsche 917 threat was completely gone. The factory Ferraris were gone. The battle for the overall win had come down to 2 remaining cars, Jackie Ickx and the old lady, and the Porsche 917 and Gerard Larousse. The 917 was smaller and lighter than the 917, running a 3-liter flat 8. It wasn't as strong as the old Ford down the straights, but it was quick through the corners, and like the GT40, it had made it through the brutal night. Herman himself was 51 years old, a veteran with 2 full decades of experience, a man who had walked away from crashes that should have ended his career years earlier. He was seasoned, clever, and wanted this win very badly. For the final 3 hours of the race, the GT40 and the Porsche ran absolutely nose to tail. Not a safe gap between them, trading positions, pushing each other to lap times faster than qualifying in cars that had already been running flat out for more than 21 consecutive hours. The crew back in the wire pit could barely stand to watch. Every lap felt like it might be the very last one either car could survive. Stop and really think about what that means. These two machines had been running flat out since 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. Their drivers had been trading shifts all night, grabbing maybe a few stolen minutes of sleep on cots behind the garage, choking down whatever food they could hold down, then climbing right back into a cockpit pushing well over 100 degrees, getting back up to race speed in pitch darkness within minutes. By Sunday morning, everything in both cars was running on borrowed time. Brakes were fading. Tires were thoroughly worn. The engines had been spinning at redline for longer than most race cars run during their entire competitive lifespan, and somehow, both crews were pushing even harder than during the first hour. That's the kind of racing that makes grown adults forget to breathe. 3 solid hours of relentless attack, in machines held together by emergency pit stop fixes, and pure, stubborn grit, with the biggest prize in endurance racing hanging on every corner. If you think this story already sounds insane, hang on, because the actual finish is somehow even crazier than everything that came before it. 23 hours and change on the clock. Ickx and Herman were still locked in a tight fight, well within striking range of one another. The old lady's Veit against the Porsche's Flat 8, Brussels against Stuttgart. Nobody in the grandstands that morning was sitting down. Out on the Mulsanne Straight, where speeds regularly topped 200 miles an hour, something strange happened. Ickx's GT40 appeared to stutter. The engine note wavered, the car visibly slowed. From inside the Porsche cockpit, it looked exactly like a car running critically low on fuel after 24 hours of hammering. Herman, sensing his opening, pushed past the old lady and took the lead. And here's where things suddenly went very quiet in the wire pit, because Ickx was bluffing. The old lady was completely fine. She had plenty of fuel and full power. Ickx had deliberately faked that stutter to lure Herman out, to convince the veteran German driver that the race was already won. As the Porsche pulled confidently ahead, Ickx calmly tucked in behind it and rode the slipstream, letting the 908 punch a hole through the air, while the old lady drafted silently in its wake, saving energy for the moment that actually mattered. Coming into the final cluster of corners, Ickx pulled out of that draft and planted his right foot down hard, and the 4.9-liter Veit answered exactly the way a big American Veit always does. The GT40 surged forward, pulling level alongside the Porsche. 2 cars side by side after 24 hours on the same stretch of road, fighting for the final corners of the most famous race in the world. Ickx got there first. The old lady crossed the line in front. The winning margin was roughly 120 meters, about 390 feet, the length of a football field. After 24 straight hours of racing through darkness, threatened rain, and breakdowns that wiped out nearly 2/3 of the starting field, that tiny gap was the entire difference between winning and losing. It remains, to this day, the closest finish in the history of the 24 hours of Le Mans. This victory was bigger than just one car winning one race. A 5-year-old machine entered by a tiny private team, driven by a 24-year-old and a guy who had never once finished Le Mans, had just beaten the most expensive, most technologically advanced race cars ever built up to that point. Porsche had spent a fortune developing the 917. Ferrari and Matra had each poured in millions, and the old lady, with her outdated bodywork and modest Veit, had simply outlasted every single one of them. Chassis 1075 became only the second car in motorsport history to win Le Mans twice, the first being a Bentley from the late 1920s. She did it in back-to-back years with completely different drivers, proving the car herself was genuinely something special. In a sport where race cars are typically treated as disposable, built for a single season then swapped out, the old lady had come back and done it again when nobody gave her any realistic chance. Jackie Ickx's career after that single night reads almost like fiction. He went on to win Le Mans 6 times, in 1969, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1981, and 1982, earning himself the nickname Monsieur de Mans. His record stood untouched for decades until Tom Christensen eventually surpassed it with 9 wins. He also won 8 Formula One Grand Prix races, claimed victory at the Paris-Dakar Rally in 1983, and years later helped Mazda pull off one of the biggest upsets in Le Mans history when their screaming rotary-powered car shocked the world and won outright in 1991. He is still alive today, living quietly in Monaco, the last surviving member of a small group of drivers who raced through that golden, terrifying era without any of the modern safety equipment we take for granted now, and his one-man walking protest changed the sport forever. The traditional Le Mans running start, a core part of the race since the 1920s, was permanently dropped after that 1969 race, replaced the next year by a far safer rolling start. All because one stubborn 24-year-old kid from Brussels stood up, quietly said, "This is genuinely dangerous," and then proved it in the harshest, most public way imaginable. So here's the part of this story that almost nobody talks about. Ford's entire revenge mission was never really about chasing one dramatic victory. It started as one humiliated executive's three-word order, and by the time it was finished, it had produced 4 straight overall Le Mans victories, reshaped the safety rules of the sport forever, and created arguably the single most valuable American race car ever built, all stemming from one canceled business deal and one badly worded contract clause. Enzo Ferrari refused to sign. Ford got their revenge in 1966 with that overwhelming podium sweep, sure, but the real lasting legacy of this saga wasn't built by Ford's factory team at all. It was built 3 years later by a tiny private outfit on a shoestring budget, an aging chassis nobody believed in anymore, and one fearless young driver who refused to play by the sport's own dangerous, outdated rules. The old lady sits today in Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, owned by the Walton family, and has never once been put up for public sale. A sister car with a lesser racing history sold for $11 million back in 2012. The broader GT40 auction record hit $13.2 million at RM Sotheby's in 2025. Chassis 1075, with her 2 Le Mans victories, her unmistakable Gulf colors, and a story that still makes hardcore car people go quiet, is believed to be worth somewhere north of $40 million today. There are faster cars in the world. There are newer cars with more raw power and far shinier coats of paint. And then there is one old Ford, painted powder blue and tangerine orange, that beat every one of its far more advanced rivals when she had no right to, driven by a young man who simply refused to run when everybody else was sprinting blindly toward danger. Some race cars earn their incredible value sitting safely on a showroom floor somewhere. The old lady earned every single penny of hers out on the Mulsanne Straight at 3 o'clock in the morning, engine screaming, brakes fading, with absolutely everything in the entire world on the line. That, right there, is exactly what $40 million sounds like when it crosses a finish line first, 390 feet ahead of history's closest ever Le Mans finish. If this story hit you the way it hit me, drop a comment and let me know which legendary race or forgotten underdog machine you want covered next. Because, honestly, motorsport history is absolutely packed full of stories exactly like this one, just waiting to be told properly.